Crazy, time fly. It's been a year since we dropped 7 trumpets. Here we are, 2020. We alive. If you're hearing this, I would hope you're alive. Event part 9. Can feel it in the air, and I can hear the trumpets sounding. The picture's getting clearer, and ain't no way around it. It seems like day by day we get closer to the second coming. They say I'm bugging, but they gon' hear the trumpets. Funny how time flies, we getting close. It's a couple seconds left.
Go ahead.
Shabbat Shalom. We are in the wilderness doing the Feast of Tabernacles. While I'm sitting here, I figured why not commit the cardinal sin and use electronic devices. I'm sure some of you at home are probably dying inside from that, but I don't care. We're going to get scriptures. Okay, so we're going to read you some precepts. These are precepts about tabernacles. So we're going to go to Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 13 through 16. And it says, "Thou shalt observe the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days. After that thou hast gathered in thy corn and wine, and thou shalt rejoice in thy feasts, thou and thy son and thy daughter and thy manservant and thy maidservant and the Levite, the stranger and the fatherless and the widow that are within thy gates. 7 days shalt thou keep the solemn feast unto the Most High thy power, and in the place which the Most High shall choose, because the Most High thy power shall bless thee in all thine increase and in all the works of thine hands. Therefore thou shalt surely rejoice. 3 times in a year shall thy males appear before Yahweh thy power in the place which he shall choose, in the feast of unleavened bread, in the feast of weeks, and in the feast of tabernacles. And they shall not appear before Yahweh empty." Bring something. If it's not a gift, food, bring your soul, participate, bring something. So now let's go to the book of Deuteronomy 31, 10 to 3. Now, while I'm doing this, you may notice you don't hear pages because I'm using electronic devices in the wilderness. So, Deuteronomy chapter 31 and verse 10. "And Moses commanded them, saying, At the end of every 7 years, in the solemnity of the year of release, in the Feast of Tabernacles." So even tabernacles relates to jubilees. When you go back to atonement, even atonement relates to jubilees, right? The year of release. "When all Israel come to appear before Yahweh thy power in the place which he shall choose, thou shalt read this law before all Israel in their hearing. Gather the people together, men and women and children, and thy stranger that is within thy gates, that they may hear, and that they may learn to fear Yahweh your power, and observe to do all the words of this law, and that their children which have not known anything may hear and learn to fear Yahweh your power, as long as ye live in the land whither ye go over Jordan to possess it." We're going to move on to 2 Chronicles, and we're going to read verses 8. Actually, we're going to read one verse. We're going to read 8 and 13. 2 Chronicles 8 and 13. "Even after a certain rate every day, offering according to the commandment of Moses on the Sabbaths and on the new moons and on the solemn feasts, 3 times in a year, even in the feast of unleavened bread and in the feast of weeks and in the feast of tabernacles." Reiterated the point of what's supposed to be kept: Sabbath, new moon, solemn feasts, 3 times in a year, unleavened bread, feast of weeks, and feast of tabernacles. So now we're going to go to the book of Ezra, and we're going to go to chapter, where are we going to go? We're going to go to 3 and 4. Ezra chapter 3 and verse 4. "They kept also the Feast of Tabernacles, as it is written, and offered the daily burnt offerings by number, according to the custom, as the duty of every day required." So this feast requires a burnt offering, aka cooking every day. So we have the feast for 7 days, we cook for 7 days. You are not violating the weekly Sabbath. In the same sense, when we do the atonement and it falls on the Sabbath, you keep the atonement. You do not violate the weekly Sabbath by doing that. So let's go to the book of Hosea, and we're going to read one verse, chapter 12, verse 9. Hosea chapter 12, verse 9. And that I am Yahweh, thy power, from the land of Egypt, will yet make thee to dwell in tabernacles, as in the days of the solemn feast. So he's going to make us dwell in tabernacles. If you pay attention to how the seasons come, it's showing us how the salvation is going to occur. Something else you should pay attention to is prior to the Feast of Tabernacles, we are expected to keep the atonement, right? Which is where we fast and afflict ourselves, right? Purification, thinking about our sins and what we did wrong and confessing them to each other, confessing them to the Most High. If you think about that, prior to him gathering you or you going into the wilderness, he wants you to be cleansed of sins, even to take you to the wilderness. Because why put that day prior to tabernacles? So this is something we can institute in general. Like if, let's say we have a feast day coming up, like, you know what? Let's fast the night before the feast. So this way we're going into it clean. It keeps a good habit. It's a habit he started. That's not the day that he asked for, but I'm sure he wouldn't mind if we were like, you know what? Let's do a fast right before, because we're going to feast the next day anyway, right? Okay, so let's go to Zechariah. I'm using my electronics, so someone pretend they're turning pages, so it sounds legit. Zechariah chapter 16, no, we're going to go 14, 16 to 19. Zechariah 14 and 16. And it shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Other One of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So even in the future it is going to be kept. And it shall be that whoso will not come up of all the families of the earth. I'm going to pause right there. It shall be that whoso will not come up of all the families of the earth. We're one family. That means there's other families, because we're going to have to be there. So there has to be other families that have to come up. Think about that if you tell people there's nobody else going to be there. Just food for thought. Of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Other One of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. And if the family of Egypt, where did they come from, go not up and come not, that have no rain, there shall be a plague wherewith Yahweh shall smite the heathen. Wait a minute, let me rewind that back. It says, and if the family of Egypt go not up and come not, that have no rain, there shall be a plague wherewith Yahweh shall smite the heathen that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Where are they on the earth? If they have to come, that means they're in the earth, right? So let's go to, one more verse. This shall be the punishment of Egypt and a punishment of all nations that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. That means all nations that are in existence at that time have to keep the Feast of Tabernacles outside of Israel, the Israelites themselves. So let's go now to the Apocrypha. We're going to go to First Esdras. Hold on, let me switch. Even in this, I don't have the whole book. That's crazy. Let's go to First Esdras 5. Cancel. And we're going to read 51. First Esdras chapter 5 and verse 51. Also they held the Feast of Tabernacles as it is commanded in the law, and offered sacrifices as was meet. We see in the time of Esdras it was kept. Let's go to Second Esdras. Second Esdras, we're going to go to 2 and 11. Their glory also will take unto me, and give these everlasting tabernacles which I had prepared for them. So the tabernacles that he prepares for us in the heavenly realm, that's going to be on the earth, this is a practice of it, of having those tabernacles. So let's go to the book of Maccabees. So we're going to go to First Maccabees, chapter 10 and verse 21. You did say everlasting. First in case you guys were wondering, I made that voice on this phone in the wilderness. First Maccabees chapter 10 verse 21. So in the 7th month of the 160th year, at the Feast of Tabernacles, Jonathan put on the holy robe and gathered together forces and provided much honor. So even in the time of the Maccabees, during the time when the Greeks were taking over, we kept the Feast of Tabernacles when we could. Let's go to 2nd Maccabees. 1, 9, we're going to read a couple of verses. We'll start at 9. 2nd Maccabees 1 and 9. And now see that ye keep the Feast of Tabernacles in the month of Caslu. We're going to jump to 18. Therefore, whereas we are now purposed to keep the purification of the temple upon the 25th day of the month of Caslu, we thought it necessary to certify you therefore that ye might also keep it, as the Feast of Tabernacles, and of the fire, which was given unto us when Nehemiah offered sacrifice. After that he builded the temple and the altar. Let's go to 2nd Maccabees chapter 10 and verse 6. 2nd Maccabees 10 and 6. And they kept the 8 days with gladness, as in the Feast of Tabernacles, remembering that not long after they had held the Feast of Tabernacles, when as they wandered in the mountains and the dens like beasts. So this is a practice of that. So let's enjoy the feast now, because when we do the feast, it's not going to be that we necessarily wanted to keep it. We won't have a choice. We will be out in the wilderness and we will eat, and we won't have particular things to eat. We're going to survive and have to live off every word of the Most High. So let's go to the book. We're going to go back to the New Testament, the book of Hebrews. And we're going to read chapter 11, verses 8 and 9. Hebrews 11, 8 and 9. By faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place where he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles, with Isaac and Jacob, their heirs with him of the same promise. So I'll read verse 10. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is Yahweh. So now with that, we're going to switch gears. And I'm glad I'm in the wilderness, because many of you won't like this. We're going to go to the book of Jubilees. The book of Jubilees. We're going to the book of Jubilees, chapter 16, and we're going to read verses 21 to 29. This is the book of Jubilees. So this is about Abraham. And he built booths for himself and for his servants on this festival, as he was the first to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles on earth. And during the 7 days he brought each day to the altar a burnt offering unto Yahweh, 2 oxen, 2 rams, 7 sheep, 1 he-goat for a sin offering, that he might atone thereby for himself and for his seed. And as thanks offering, 7 rams, 7 kids, 7 sheep, 7 he-goats, and their fruit offerings and their drink offerings. And he burnt all the fat thereof on the altar, a chosen offering unto Yahweh for a sweet-smelling savor. And morning and evening he burnt fragrant substances, frankincense and galbanum, and stacked, and nard, and myrrh, and spice, and costum. All these 7 he offered, crushed, mixed together in equal parts, and pure. And he celebrated the feast during 7 days, rejoicing with all his heart and with all his soul, he and all those who were in his house, and there was no stranger with him, nor any that was uncircumcised. So we see the difference of keeping the tabernacles now to what is going to be then. The nations have to come up and do it. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do it with us. Verse 26, and he blessed his creator who created him in his generation, for he created him according to his good pleasure. For he knew and perceived that from him would arise the plant of righteousness for the eternal generations, and from him a holy seed, so that it should become like him who made all things. And he blessed and rejoiced, and he called the name of this festival the festival of Yahweh, a joy acceptable to the Most High Power. And we blessed him forever, and all his seed after him throughout all the generations of the earth, because he celebrated this festival in its season, according to the testimony of the heavenly tablets. For this reason it is ordained on the heavenly tablets concerning Israel, that they should celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days with joy in the 7th month, acceptable to the Adawan, a statute forever throughout their generations every year. So that's the Feast of Tabernacles. So now, just like I mentioned that there was a fast prior to going in this. If you think about it, right, everything we did Passover, which was followed by unleavened bread. Each one is a transition, carnal to immortal, right, to non-carnal. So the same thing here, just before we go into the tabernacles, the wilderness, the world is gone, there's a fast of purification, basically a killing of the body so that you can tabernacle. So we're going to go into Jubilees 34, 10 through 19, and these will be the last verses. Jubilees chapter 34, verses 10 through 19. Jubilees 34 and 10. This is the origin of the atonement according to the book of Jubilees. So mind you, this is prior to it being said in Leviticus. Jubilees 10 and 34. I'm sorry, 34 and 10. It says, in the 7th year of this week, he sent Joseph to learn about the welfare of his brothers from his house to the land of Shechem. And he found him in the land of Dothan. And they dealt treacherously with him and formed a plot against him to slay him. But changing their minds, they sold him to Ishmaelite merchants. And they brought him down into Egypt, and they sold him to Potiphar, the eunuch of Pharaoh, the chief of the cooks, priest of the city of Elu. And the sons of Jacob slaughtered a kid, pay attention to that, and dipped the coat of Joseph in the blood and sent it to Jacob, their father, on the 10th day of the 7th month. And he mourned all that night, for they had brought it to him in the evening. And he became feverish with mourning for his death. And he said, an evil beast had devoured Joseph. And all the members of his house mourned with him that day. And they were grieving and mourning with him all that day. And his sons and his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted for his son. And on that day Bilhah heard that Joseph had perished, and she died mourning him. And she was living in Quarateth, and Dinah also his daughter died after Joseph had perished. And there came these 3 mournings upon Israel in 1 month. And they buried Bilhah over against the tomb of Rachel, and Dinah also, his daughter, they buried there. And they mourned for Joseph 1 year and did not cease, for he said, let me go down to the grave mourning my son. For this reason, it is ordained for the children of Israel that they should afflict themselves on the 10th day of the 7th month. On that day, the news which made him weep for Joseph, came to Jacob his father, that they should make atonement for themselves thereon with a young goat on the 10th of the 7th month, once a year for their sins, for they had grieved the affection of their father regarding Joseph his son. And this day has been ordained that they should grieve thereon for their sins and for all their transgressions and for all their errors, so that they might cleanse themselves on that day once a year. Shalom.
That's the origin of it. That's beautiful.